Hey buds, Brandmouse here, and I wanted to touch on a topic that I've been seeing more and more frequently since the closure of the Diablo beta. This is the gear versus skill point debate. I've seen a fair amount of discussion online about the gearing situation and whether or not it's a step up from previous titles or falling in line with them. The general tone and at least consensus of complaints promotes the idea that Diablo 4 does not do enough to make it stand out from Diablo 3 and the path for which it took post Reaper of Souls. The notion that skills are the core of the ARPG experience, and that Blizzard needs to be reworking them to focus on how skills develop your character more in late game rather than the gear which you'll get. While I can see the appeal to the ideal, I do not think it's supported by the evidence and history of the series and the genre as a whole. And if this was the direction the game took, the endgame would be reduced to a lot less investment and time spent in the world of Sanctuary. ARPG games long have been dictated by the ebb and flow of grind. How long it takes you to farm an item, how lucky you've been assembling your build, which keystone pieces of loot have really amplified your power. Whether it's Path of Exile, Diablo, or Torchlight, it never really was that different. The character abilities were the core of the gameplay experience and a manifestation of the user's taste, but the gear was truly what enabled you to spread your wings and fly. Building a character was always an interweaving of the skills and gear, and it was in this process of finding these pieces of loot that made the experience so rewarding and stimulating. For there are a finite amount of levels and limited skill points to allocate. There is a threshold and ceiling of which you eventually will hit without much resistance along the way. This process is a fun one, but generally speaking, it's fairly easy to accomplish. And this is where the chase comes in. Your brain may give you a dopamine spike when you get a new cool ability and when you use it for the first time. But I'm willing to bet that this experience pales in comparison to the first time you got your first Shaco to drop off countless Mephisto runs. It is the rarity and difficulty to obtain which promotes such a response. The build-up before the explosion, the anticipation as much as the payoff. Our brains are wired this way, motivated by desires and driven to accomplish our goals and realize the potential. The pleasure is in the anticipation of reward, and this is why ARPGs and their grinds are focused on gearing rather than skill progression in the long term. The perceived happiness of the eventual build climax is the motivation to continue pushing to obtain the pieces that you require. The developers know our psychology as humans. They know the process which elicits the best longevity of their product, how to create habituation within the game environment, and to drip feed you dopamine along the way. This is why ARPGs have been designed the way they are. It's based on basic human behavior and interaction. And I don't think Diablo 4 is doing anything different than the previous titles because it would change how the genre operates and risk alienating their audience. So I find it almost paradoxical when I see waves of complaints that this game is somehow too much like its predecessor and how that's a bad thing. The reality is, it never was a bad thing, at least in terms of gearing. And I honestly don't recall Diablo 2 skills mattering much more than that of Diablo 3. The strategy always was to load up your points into strength and dexterity only as much as you were required to meet the requirements of gear. Everything else you dumped into vitality. Any build you would create followed a set skill path alongside this, whether it was Smiter, Dream Paladin, Javazon, Lightning Sork. All of these builds required specific combinations of rune words to enable their top end and potential. Even with this in mind, Diablo 4 has in many ways hybridized this system and integrated skills even more so into the gear. I believe this will further incentivize people to seek out the pieces that they need to complete their builds. And this is only referring to legendaries, for which we have tried and tested. The true chase items in the end will be the uniques, and those which will have much greater impacts on your endgame decisions and builds. Ultimately, no one is right or wrong to feel a certain way, and I can understand the perspective of wanting change or more focus on other areas in the game. But I will say that I think this is a situation where people think they want something without knowing truly what they are asking. I believe at the core of all ARPGs, gear is the focus, and if this was shifted too much from it, the experience for the long term would suffer. If you found anything interesting in this video and you'd like to help support me in my crusade of bringing you interesting Diablo content, slap a like and comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe, it truly helps. Cheers.